to this week's Everyday Inclusion and Belonging, where we talk about literally everything under the sun that has to do with diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. Today, we're talking about health equity. I'm super excited for this conversation. Let me first just do a quick visual description of myself. I am a white woman with mid-length red hair. I've got it straightened, sort of curly today. I'm wearing some red frames, a blue shirt, and behind me is my bookshelf with some of my favorite books and tchotchkes. I am joined today, and y'all, those of you that are part of the series, I don't typically read bios. I have guests introduce themselves, but I did not want to screw up Dr. Bayo Curry-Winchell's biography because there's a lot, y'all. So she is the medical director of community engagement and health equity, co-lead of diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, and medical director of urgent care clinics, Carbon Health, and St. Mary's Regional Medical Center, Reno, Nevada. Dr. Curry-Winchell is also the founder of Beyond Clinical Walls, the medical director of the, am I going to say this right? Is it Washoe?
Washoe, yep, perfect.
Washoe County Sexual Assault Response Team, and volunteers as assistant medical examiner at Washoe. I don't know why I'm fumbling on that, not that many of you would care, County Child Protective Services. During COVID-19, Dr. Curry-Winchell joined the Reno Mayor's Task Force and Governor's Medical Advisory Team. She has gotten the well-deserved awards, y'all. 2022 Healthcare Heroes Award from the Nevada Business Magazine, Community Service Award from Washoe County Medical Society, 2021 Young Physician Award from Washoe County Medical Society, 2020 PBS Reno Spotlight Extraordinary Neighbor Award, Sierra Nevada's Top 20 Most Powerful Women Award in 2019, and was recently named one of 75 Black healthcare leaders to know by Becker's Hospital Review. She was a TEDx presenter in 2022, and we're going to post that link. I urge you all to go and watch that TEDx. And I just love, before we went live, we were also talking about what it's like to be a working mom. She and her husband enjoy time this year at Tahoe, Reno area with their two daughters. And we were just talking about Dr. BCW, like the times that you want your kids to go fast is when they tend to go the slowest. So with your busy schedule, so excited to have you here. And welcome. And let's dig in and let's talk about health equity.
Yes. Thank you, Mo, for just having me. I'm so excited to join today and just share health information and specifically health equity and what it means and how there are so many different intersectionalities to it. And when you think about it that way, you can really find a way to move that needle and find ways to improve, but also acknowledge the things that need improvement. So I'm excited to talk today. So thank you for having me.
Yeah, I love, so let's start. Let's just talk about what do we mean when we're talking about health equity?
So often when we hear that term, it tends to be where we think it's just, access, or it's just a problem of specific groups. Well, that is correct, but also there's so much more involved. And so when you talk about health equity, everyone should have the right to have access to healthcare. It should just be a right and a common place where if you are sick and you are ill, you have the opportunity to get better or to find out what's happening and make your choice on how you would like to, go down that path. And so when we look at health equity, we need to look at underserved groups, marginalized communities, people of color. And we know historically that there has been inequities and disparities. But if we want to improve and make a difference in health equity, we have to acknowledge what has happened in the past. Then after you acknowledge it, you have the opportunity to see what can we do to move it forward. So it's a blend of things. It's access, it's acknowledgement. It's also just being open to saying, this is what we've got, what we've done wrong, and this is what we need to do moving forward.
Mm. There's so much of that, the history, then current, and then future state. Um, we have a section in Everyday Inclusion that is around inclusive healthcare. And I have to tell you, Dr. BCW, one of the most challenging sections for me personally to write was the history of healthcare. So when we look at, I think a lot of people are familiar with Tuskegee, right? And just the absolute tragedy of Tuskegee. And like, that's one example. There's so much from forced sterilization to, and I'm not just talking about the Black community. I'm talking about people with disabilities, Native and Indigenous. The history is deep, and we have to talk about it, right? If we can't talk about and understand what that history is, how can we make it better? And I think a piece of what you've done is really saying, here's, well, and we are going to post your TED Talk, right? But you go into deeply why the Black community approaches healthcare with skepticism. And I think skepticism is maybe a kind word. So share a little bit more.
It was really important to me in that talk to share that historical history, because often people, they hear about the mistrust, but they're not taking the time to take a step back and learn and understand that mistrust. Because once you have an understanding of anything, it's really helpful to be able to digest and then start to say, oh, now I can understand where they're coming from, or now I see a new way of connecting with people. And so when I think of the Black community, yes, when we talk about the Tuskegee and all of the things that have really led to mistrust that are verbally passed down through generations. And I mention that because I talk about my dad in the talk. And for those who don't know, a 99-year-old triple war veteran, World War II, Korean, and Vietnam. And I share how he felt as far as with the healthcare system and how he had the mistrust. I talk about the vaccine, COVID, and how he said, I'm not going to take that. And if I wasn't in healthcare, that verbal kind of pass over of like mistrust, I would have felt the same way. And so really thinking about how people are sharing this information, and then thinking about how you can at least acknowledge, but then put new information forward is so important. The other thing I really wanted to highlight is when you look at that historical mistrust, and then you look at how Black people are dying at a disproportionately higher rate from preventable diseases, I've always thought to myself, why is that happening? And so when I had the opportunity to get into medical school and go forward, I said, well, I see these algorithms that are putting Blacks at a disadvantage from the get-go. And so when you look at that and you combine all of those things, it is just another reason why we have mistrust, and also another reason why these inequities and disparities exist. And so when we look at health equity, we have to look at all of those areas. And whether you're a patient or a provider, there is room to grow and learn, so we can make the appropriate steps moving forward.
And I think a piece of that is current acknowledgement.
Yes.
So if you're a part of a healthcare system, and you are in any point of the care cycle, understanding whether Black community, Native, Indigenous, disability community, acknowledgement of your understanding that you're not clueless about all of this, I think is a good first step. I'd love, right, even to say, I understand you might be approaching this with skepticism. I know the history, I know the, right, and to kind of, right, to always to own the mess, I think is sometimes to be able to clean up the mess.
I really think that, at least in my space, I tell providers, we are trained, we have all of this wonderful healthcare information, but if you can't deliver it and put it forward for your patient specifically, you're not helping them. And so we always talk about listening and meeting people where they are. Well, if you want to do that, you need to ask, where are they? And learn about where they came from and what challenges they are facing. That's health equity, because then when you put that information forward, there is an equal opportunity for them to digest, take it in, and for you to digest and take it in, and then have this form of healthcare truly delivered.
Yeah, I think this idea of cultural humility, right? Not just cultural competence, but
Right.
cultural curiosity and cultural humility. And that many times a patient has information and knows best, right?
Yes.
You've got the MD or the PA or the RN or the whatever it may be. And a patient knows about their experience. They can share with you some things about intersectionality, things that you might not even know or understand, right? So that listening and the power of curiosity and humility.
It is so important. And I tell my med students and residents, that's delivering healthcare, finding out about your patient beyond just the textbook elements of it. And then also taking a step back and recognizing your unconscious or implicit biases. And the other thing I think from a healthcare standpoint that we need to do is really highlight the missteps that we have right now in healthcare. And I talk about race-based algorithms that are impacting Black and Brown lives every single day. And so when you share that, that's a lot to kind of digest and swallow. And so what I like to start with is just talking about definitions. When we think about certain diseases, and it's often shared that diabetes, hypertension is a person of color's disease. Well, race is a social construct. It has no biological or genotypical pieces. So how does the color of my skin make me more likely to get a disease? And so that is an issue, because when you are going from that lens, you're not seeing that patient for what they have, all of those true intersectionalities. And that's something that we have to look at, because your healthcare shouldn't be based on the color of your skin. Yes, genetics, family history, social determinants of health, those things can play a role, but the color of my skin should not. And that's where I really am, when I think about health equity, is highlighting those race-based algorithms that often people don't know about. And so my goal is, in hopes to share this information so you can arm yourself when you are in the clinic and a hospital, that you know what you could ask for, or always ask questions, but also know about these algorithms.
I think, right, the algorithms are, and I love the detail that you go into in your TED Talk, because right, as you're sharing those, it's like, well, of course the outcomes are different.
Yeah.
Right? Right. When you're going into something that is systemically racist, right, of course the outcomes are different. I want to go back to something that I think people can personally, I love the idea of the questions that I can ask as a patient, but then the questions that I can ask myself if I'm any part of being a provider around unconscious bias. And I know that you're going to be able to rattle off the stats, right? But for example, Black women not being believed about pain. And I share this. So my son and I almost did not make it through his birth. And I know, Dr. BCW, that if I had been a Black woman, we probably would have died. But because I was a white woman, my provider believed my pain.
Right.
Right. And so they were able to, the intervention in time to save our lives. And so how can, as providers, because unconscious bias, we have to constantly interrupt, right? So whether it is med students believing that that Black skin is literally thicker, right? Pain tolerance, all of these things. What's your recommendation, right? How can we continue constantly to interrupt that bias in everyday practice?
And I know it sounds repetitive, but truly recognizing it and owning it.
Mm,
Because when you do that, then you can do something with it
mhm,
because we all have it, as you mentioned. And so lifting that curtain and saying, I have this, that is a way to internally have growth and reduce those biases possibly from happening as often, and they will still continue, but that's something that you can do every single day, of just recognizing it, owning it, and say this happened, and then taking it a step further. Why did it happen?
mm,
Because when you can ask yourself those questions, that, as we know, we're learning every day, and so that is an opportunity for you to learn even more about yourself, more about where those thoughts or origins come from. And through that, there's a level of discovery that you get from that you
mm.
get to put forward in a way of decreasing that disruption that is happening from those implicit and unconscious biases.
I, I am not quite sure why this just came to mind for me. So my first job out of college was with a manufacturing based company. And one of the things that they had us do was actually, um, I worked night shift and wore steel toe boots, working on the equipment, right? Really understanding the people, understanding the work. And one of the things that we had to do, there was one set of printing presses that they were slightly the it used toluene, which is explosive. And so
Yeah.
before you ever went into one of those presses, and they were huge, they were like 3 stories tall, you had to touch a pad that would any static electricity that you have, right? So it would diffuse that static electricity, right? So I wouldn't go in and cause this explosion. I would love for us to see in healthcare something that's akin to that, like, right? How do I touch that pad metaphorically so that I can, and I'm going to get the Hippocratic oath wrong, but like first do no harm, right? Right. So that I'm going into it, right? Because I had to do that. It was a part of the habit of then going and safely doing this work. And I think when we're talking about being able to safely do work as medical professionals, right? To do no harm and to diffuse what could be our unconscious bias. I would love to see somebody come up with something that every medical professional has to do, that is like this reminder of unconscious bias, interrupt, go in and see this patient for who they are. So somebody come up with that, okay?
I would love that. It needs to be woven into our fabric from the
Yeah.
time you start medical school or even before, and then a precursor. When I say before you even get into medical school, what training, what things have you done in that space to acknowledge it, I think would be very important. And then as you progress, having that constant touch base of I'm learning more, or this is happening, and those check-ins as you go through your career. So in medicine, we have continuing medical education credits. And I think that's another way where that unconscious and implicit biases could be a part of it. And it should be just as important as any of the other requirements, because we are dealing with people's lives every day. And this is just as important, and it should be at the top, because that's how we are going to really be able to help these inequities, these disparities, these things where pain is dismissed just based on how I look. And so it's an uncomfortable conversation. And I think that's a key, because often people don't want to have these uncomfortable conversations. But when you do that, and you have a discussion. And I do that with my students and so forth. And you can see the body language and this jarring, like, oh, I don't want to go there. But when you do, it's a gift. It's truly a gift. And I can share Mo.
We're talking about life and death.
Yes.
Right. Privilege, right? And comfort.
Yes.
That is, right? I would say, particularly in this field, you have to be able to give up that privilege, right? You have to be uncomfortable to be able to address these things.
Correct.
But sorry, I cut you off.
Oh, no, it's perfect. But I was just like, you have to be willing to kind of stretch yourself and understand that piece. Because, when I think of how you said, we went into this to do no harm. And I hold that true to my heart. And I think that's why I'm so passionate about putting forward any sort of health information in an equitable way, but highlighting those things that are happening in our healthcare system that need improvement. And my goal is to have a discussion, to share the information. I received a compliment, and it was interesting because I think that is my go-to. Like, you find out, how do you, move that needle? And for me, I apologize, it's a way of disarming and sharing information that is uncomfortable. Because once you disarm it and you have that conversation, people can hear you.
Yes.
And then they feel more likely to say, okay, this is where you're coming from. And so even if we have a disagreement and we don't land on an agreement, we had the conversation. Yeah. And that can spark change. It can spark movements. And that's what I believe is truly needed.
So you've shared a couple of different things that folks can practically do, right? Be willing to get uncomfortable, to be constantly learning and questioning. Are there some other resources, tools, ideas that you have for anybody that's in a healthcare system? And because this is something that will take all of us. And again, the stakes are literally life and death. So any other advice or tools, resources, thoughts you have for what I can do as a part of anybody that is a part of a healthcare system?
So, I go from first my patients, or anyone listening, because we're all patients in some sort of way. I would say, for advocacy, ask questions. If there are things that you don't understand about yourself, your family member, and you're not getting that answer, go to somebody else, because you deserve to have that answer. You deserve to be able to ask as many questions as you need to feel comfortable. And I think that's a huge piece of healthcare as far as advocacy. Highlighting those things that you have not been able to really feel comfortable with is a big thing. When I think of like,
go ahead. Can I have you pause right there? Because I think that one is so important. I think often, and whether it is cultural beliefs, religious beliefs, backgrounds, everything, right? We're taught almost to come in and not question our doctors, right? And I had that kind of flipped on its head when my daughter was born. And I think almost everybody that tunes in knows that she is a little person. And for most providers, she was the first little person that they had ever had as a patient. Oh. And so I had to, and my husband, we had to do all the research to come in, to be advocates, to, before she had tubes put in her ears, to say, you know what, that jugular vein is going to be really close to the surface over here. And, sure enough, when they came out, he's like, I'm so glad you said that. Probably would have nicked it. So I was thrust as a parent into advocacy. And so now I'm not afraid to advocate when it comes to my own questions, my own, because I got that practice, because as a mama bear, it's what I was going to do. But oftentimes we would go in, and even armed and even knowing more than her doctors did, there'd be a little bit of pushback. And I, back in my head, I'm like, this is my kid's health. I'm willing to keep pushing, right, until they go get the information they need, right, before they move forward. And so that takes some courage, y'all, right, to ask those questions and I think at the end of the day, if you can remind yourself, they also have your good or your family members' good in mind. They might have terrible bedside manner. They might be throwing their credentials at you. Keep asking.
Yes.
Because right? You know some things that they don't.
I'm so sorry, Mo. I got so excited. I was like, yes, that is so important. Your health is your most prized possession. And you should advocate. You should ask questions. And if they are inappropriate, you don't have to take that. You go for someone who will see you and hear you and listen to you, because that's what we're here for. I truly believe, as a doctor, I love what I get to do every single day. I cherish it. And I feel so honored to be able to help people in their most, times that are just very distressing and sometimes celebratory. And so you have the right to advocate and be able to ask for what you deserve to have. It's your health.
Yeah.
Yes, I felt, and the other thing, Mo, it made me think of was when I think about what organizations and what others can do, I often see where there's great intention, where people are going into certain communities and underserved and sharing and providing all of these health resources. But one way to really be able to connect with those communities is before you go in there and you provide all these resources, canvas that community, do a town hall, introduce yourself, let them know who you are, build trust, and then ask, what would you like? Like that to me is truly how you should be delivering healthcare to all. But when you look at how sometimes we tend to say we want to be there, we're coming in. Well, they may not want you there. And so people will say, well, they didn't want me. No one showed up at my health fair. Well, that's a gift in the way that, number one, taking a step back, finding out why they didn't want you there. Go in and have a conversation, because that's the information you need to know of what barrier is in place. And then you have this information that can help you deliver what they are asking.
That's a humility piece, huh? And curiosity.
Yes.
Right. Like so much of this, I always feel like goes back to like some of the things that some of the best tools we have as parents are the best tools that we have for everything.
Yes. It's so
I haven't
true.
made an assumption with my kids. Never worked out well for me.
Correct. Just asking. And you're like, sometimes you may not like the answer, but it allows that opportunity to discuss and learn and be able to do something in a different way. So I think those are real powerful ways that you can help in the healthcare or health equity. And another thing that I think of, Mo, is often I think we think social justice and health equity are separate, and it's overlapping. And so I would encourage people to think about that, because the health piece is just as important as the social justice piece. And we are all working towards a common goal. And so I think when you can tap into healthcare professionals who are working with patients, working with people, and find ways to overlap that when we talk about diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, that's really an opportunity to see the whole picture of what DEIB work is.
Ooh, so I feel like I feel like that was your truth bomb. I always end these by asking for a truth bomb, and I think you dropped your truth bomb.
Yeah.
Unless you have another one that you want to share.
It just came out. That's how I
I love it, and I appreciate this conversation. I so appreciate the work that you're doing. Y'all, we're going to put Dr. BCW's TED Talk link. Watch it. Even having done the research that I had done, it was like, I did not know that. I did not know that. I did not know that, right? Staying in and leaning into the curiosity. And we all have a role to play, whether it is a patient or a provider. We all have a role to play, and it's life and death, y'all. So this is worthwhile work, if ever there was worthwhile work in the DEIB space. So thank you, thank you, thank you. Keep doing great work. And we are here for you to support everything that you are up to in the world.
Thank you for having me, Mo. I am filled with gratitude for this opportunity. Thank you for letting me share this important message in hopes that we help even just one individual. That's what it's about for me, one person where they know something that they can help themselves or their family. So thank you for having me.
Oh, everybody get out there, do the next right thing. Make sure that you are following Dr. BCW. She's putting out amazing information all the time, doing good work in the world. And we will see you next week on Everyday Inclusion and Belonging. Bye, y'all.